We'll talk about that.
It's quite poor. Hello and welcome, my name is Ian. This channel is all about music and art, and this is where we talk about music and art. And in this video I'm going to look back at what's happening regarding music streaming in the UK. And over the last couple of months, the UK government's Digital, Culture, Media and Sports Committee have been looking into the way that streaming platforms and large record companies manage payments to songwriters, musicians and performers. And on the 15th of October 2020, Parliament published a news article stating that this particular committee would inquire into the impact of streaming on the future of the music industry. The article stated that the inquiry will consider whether the government should take action to protect the industry from piracy in the wake of steps taken by the EU on copyright and intellectual property rights. I knew that some high-profile musicians were giving evidence to this committee, and the first of these meetings was on the 24th of November and another meeting on the 8th of December. Now these meetings were long, lasting over 3 hours each. So what I've done is I've edited them down into shorter videos, and I have put direct links to the questions in the description down below, which will make it easier for you if you want to look at a specific question and not watch the whole thing. And it's worth providing a background to the witnesses giving evidence to these sessions. And in the first session we had Tom Gray, who is the founder of the BrokenRecord campaign, which is an artist-led movement on Twitter using the hashtag BrokenRecords, and highlights the low per stream royalties and has gained significant engagement from musicians, music fans and the media. And it highlights the discussion within the industry about the problems that streaming royalty distribution and how it could be addressed. And in his day job, he's a vocalist, guitarist and songwriter for the band Gomez. We also had Colin Young, who is a streaming auditor and accountant from his own company, CC Young & Co., where he specialises by acting for clients in the music and the entertainment sector. And lastly, in this first session, we had Tom Frederikse, who is a partner in Clinton Solicitors and is dual qualified as a UK solicitor and a New York attorney. And Tom is recognised as a leading practitioner in digital media and technology related matters, who works on a wide range of commercial and media matters. He regularly deals with IP issues including copyright, trademark, brand protection, rights, licensing, data protection and information security. All of the sessions were chaired by Julian Knight, and the complete list of committee members and the relevant links are in the description down below. Now this recording is made in agreement with the UK Parliament Terms and Conditions, which state that I cannot alter the video or the audio of the recording in any way. I can't use this material for satire or use it on websites or social media platforms that promote, encourage and facilitate illegal activity and encourage hatred and antisocial behaviour. So here is part 1 of session 1 from the 24th of November 2020 into the economics of music streaming.
That committee, and this is our first hearing into our inquiry into economics of music streaming. We're joined by 2 panels today. On our first panel we will have Tom Frederikse, the partner at Clinton Solicitors, Tom Gray, founder of BrokenRecord campaign and vocalist, guitarist and songwriter for Gomez, and Colin Young, streaming auditor and accountant, CC Young & Co. Before we ask our first questions, I'm going to ask members to declare any interests. Kevin Brennan.
And PRS for music, a member of the IJC Academy for Songwriters and Composers, and I receive occasional payments for working as a musician, which are declared in the Register of Members' Interests.
Thank you. Alex Davis-Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a member of the Musicians' Union.
Thank you, Alex. Great. Good morning to Tom Frederikse, Tom Gray and Colin Young. Good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Tom, I'm afraid you've got the short straw. You got the first question, I'm afraid. Tom Gray. Just in terms of how revenue is distributed between platforms and industry and artists, are the proportions, in your opinion, fair?
Not generally speaking, no. If you're a fully independent artist, it's possible to do okay in streaming because around 55% of the money is coming through to you. But most artists are working with labels, and most successful artists are working with major labels, and those deals are usually 80-20 in the label's favor. And of course, most artists are also heavily indebted to the labels as well. And be very important for you to understand how those record contracts work too, in order to understand why money doesn't make its way through to artists. There is a thing called the recoupment deal, which is employed by almost all of the major record labels. In fact, entirely all of them. And you might think that the way that a deal would work is they would give you money, they'd invest, and when they've made that money back, they'll pay you a royalty. But actually what happens is they assign you a royalty and they make the debt back only from your royalty. So for instance, in my day, it was around 15%. All of the money, that was made from my records, they would have made that money back many times over before they start paying me anything. So artists are often indebted. Money isn't coming through to them. So irrespective of the way that we divide it up, we have a bigger problem anyway.
Just furthermore, just on recoupment, Tom. I've been an author, and in that I get an advance, and then when that advance is earned out, as it's called, from sales, then I start to get royalties. Is that different? Is it different in music to that?
This is what I think you're describing is what we would call a profit share deal in the record industry, whereby once the company have made back their outlay, they start to pay a royalty. But that is not what's happening. There is a royalty assigned to the artist, and the total debt is only paid back via the artist's royalty. So the advance, the money they've used to buy out the copyright, the marketing money, the money to produce the record and record the record, all of that money is paid back from the artist's percentage. They don't just take total receipts and then start paying out a royalty. No.
That's really clear. Thank you for that explanation. Mr. Young, good morning.
I was going to say.
Right. When we talk about the industry share, presumably that means artists and record labels. Is the distribution of revenues fair between those two pillars? What is your view on that?
I think it's a commercial deal that's been negotiated. I think it's historic insofar as a conventional record deal is very much based on what would happen in the physical world, and that hasn't necessarily improved in the streaming world. So Tom was explaining, for example, the recoupment. So an artist provides his exclusive services to the record label. The record label will then have a series of options. There is an initial period and usually 3 options. Each option is for a commitment of, suppose, 1 album. It's at the record company's exclusive discretion whether they exercise the option or not. Each album option is going to take, from start to finish, probably 2 years. So Tom was explaining that under a conventional record deal, an artist would receive a royalty of 20%. Might be as high as 24. From that 24, the producer will have to be paid. So the artist is likely to receive a royalty of 20%. The record label then maintains a ledger. And this is it's an internal arrangement. The ledger is maintained by the record company, and then every 6 months sends a royalty statement to the artist. On that ledger will be included the personal advance that was paid to the artist, which makes sense. It will include all of the origination costs for the recording. So it'll include the studio costs, the travel to get to the studio, the flights. It will include the producer, the accommodation, all of the origination costs to record it. It will also include 100% of tour support. So when the band goes and tours the UK, then it stretches further and tries to break Europe, and then stretches further still and tries to break America. Those costs to pay for the band will be added to the ledger. And it will also include 50% of video costs. So quite a big mountain. And it's going to attribute 100% of each of those costs. In return, it receives a royalty, and that royalty is 20%, as I said. So 20% of the income and 100% of the costs. Now the challenge is to recoup that within the cycle, because you've got a 2-year period in essence, you've got to recoup it by. And so before the next advance is given and the next recording costs. The costs are immediate onto the ledger, the income is delayed. The domestic income will appear there in the period, January to June, July to December, but the overseas will be delayed by 6 months. And that's the challenge. 20% of the income, 100% of the costs, and you only have a limited window to recoup it in.
Thank you, Mr. Young. That's really, really clear. Thank you very much. Mr. Frederikse, could you explain to the committee how recorded music is licensed to streaming platforms? How is it different from physical sales or radio? And how have recoupment deals affected how revenues from music is distributed to all the parties?
Well, the streaming services pay the same suppliers that used to exist in the physical world, insofar as there are record labels for the sound recording and publishers for the composition. That hasn't changed from the days of CDs. The change really is that in the old physical world, there were so many more costs involved in terms of physical product, transport, breakage, so forth. Whereas today, many of those costs have disappeared, or those costs have been transferred to the distributor, being Spotify or Apple Music, or whatever it is. I do think that each of these questions you've been asking needs to be looked at in 2 levels. At the top level, there is the division of costs and profits and so forth. At the first, at the top, between the service, the record label, and the publisher, and then below that, at the second level, is the division between the publisher, the label, and their creators. And those two working together create probably the reason for this inquiry, insofar as that artists feel that some leveling up is needed to change the imbalance that has increased and happened since the beginning of streaming, mainly because the huge risks and physical costs to the labels that were the story of the physical world for 50 years are largely gone. And that accounts for the very huge increase in operating margins and profits and so forth. And artists feel that they should be able to share in that.
Distribute the music. It's cheaper to distribute the music, therefore, but however, the economics are still the same as they were in the past. Is that a fair summation?
That's right. I'll give you a specific answer to your question. The most common interpretation of the split would be 30% is retained by the service, 70% goes to the suppliers, and that split is roughly 55% to the sound recording and 15% to the publisher.
Thank you. What recourse do artists have if they do feel as if they're being ripped off, that they don't feel as if, frankly, they're making the money that their work actually deserves? Mr. Frederikse.
Yeah, well, it's that 55% to the label that I think is the point of contention. It is obviously by far the largest piece. It is going to the record labels, and the record labels are dealing with that 55% largely in the way that Tom Gray described. And much of the division of that 55% between the label and the artist is a holdover from the physical world of the last century, and that is at the heart of the artist's complaint. They are seeking a leveling up and a rebalancing of the risk-reward trade-off.
But what can they do?
Well, what can artists do? I mean, these are private contracts, and it's very difficult to interfere with them. And that's why I'm sure you'll have seen many of the written submissions here that the suggestion is the committee should recommend to government that the most likely route to success with this inquiry, if the aim is to rebalance that risk-reward trade-off, would be to expand the role of PPL in streaming. This is also known as equitable remuneration. It's a mechanism by which the label side of the streaming money is collected by PPL and distributed between the rights holders and the creators in a predetermined way.
Thank you. Kevin Brennan.
Thanks, everyone. And can I ask Tom Gray a couple of questions? Tom, obviously, this inquiry has come about at a time when musicians are down on their knees as a result of the loss of live music, and it's therefore shone a light on the recorded music sector. Can you tell us about the BrokenRecord campaign which you founded and what your main concerns are with music streaming?
I started BrokenRecord because this is a problem we've been hearing about forever. This isn't new. There has always been a problem with inequity and unfairness in the music industry. This isn't the first time any of you will have heard about this. But streaming has come along, this wonderful technology that puts music in all of our back pockets, all music that's ever been made. But unfortunately, it's made the problem worse and more profound because it's so much harder to understand. If there's one thing that this country is amazing at, truly great at, it's music. We're genuinely world beating at it. It's an incredible driver of GVA growth and exports, and brings us soft power in the world. So this is something we really, we need to nurture and protect and give consideration to my mind. There's over 50,000 professional musicians, entrepreneurial, self-employed musicians in this country. Many tens of thousands of songwriters and performing artists. And they live in every constituency in this country. But, we know from survey data that over half of them earn under £20,000 a year. Another survey puts the median around £16,000 or £17,000 a year. And a big survey across Europe of all performer artists put the amount that is made per annum from streaming at around £900.
Tom, if I just stop you there at that point, I mean, in a way, that's sometimes called the long tail, isn't it? That there is in the music industry. When people look at these problems, sometimes they see very successful artists and think, why should we be bothered about, whether they've got a good record deal or not, and so on. But actually, this what you're describing is it affects people on very modest incomes who are not getting any share out of streaming. Is that a fair point?
That's absolutely right. I'm not here to argue for Paul McCartney to get more money. Far from it. This is happening whilst a few multinational corporations, foreign-based corporations, are making the most money, the best growth, the best profit margins they've ever made in their history. If we balance, this is the point, if we rebalance this, money goes into the UK economy. It goes into UK PLC. It goes into every single one of your constituencies. It seems like a bit of a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. We need to protect our talent pipeline. We need to protect these people on quite modest incomes. And you're right, COVID, we shouldn't change this because of COVID. Far from it. But what COVID has done is it has provided an opportunity for us to really see what we're making from recorded music. And it's pretty horrific.
I want to draw you, Tom, onto what you've put forward in your written evidence as a potential solution to this, because clearly, for any lay person, the intricacies of, record deals and, the way that all these things work, it's best hidden mainly from the public, but it seems that it's also hidden from musicians, because a lot of musicians don't really, when I speak to them, understand the nature of these kinds of deals. What is equitable remuneration, another jargon phrase. Can you explain that for a lay person, what it is, and why it potentially would be something that this committee could recommend, from this inquiry, and could easily be achieved, and what benefits it would bring?
I'd like to sort of deal with sort of the body of your question a little bit there first. I mean, thank you so much also to the committee for hearing from me. It's a real privilege to be here today, but you're going to hear an awful lot of quite complex issues over the course of this inquiry. You're going to hear about Google and their sort of ruinous effect on music pricing. You're going to hear about market domination, a thing that probably the CMA should be looking at. You're going to be, hearing about transparency and data issues and auditing rights and global data standardization problems. You're going to hear about the horrific, sort of terrible undervaluation of the song. And these are all serious issues. They're all things that you really need to be thinking about. But what I don't want you to do is to go, oh my, this is too complicated. This is, we should abandon this and just leave the status quo.
Tom, so tell us why it could be quite simple then. What is the law?
Okay, fair enough, I'll get to it. Look, equitable remuneration does what it says on the tin. Should we say ER from now on, because it's such a mouthful, equitable remuneration. But it does what it says on the tin. It's equal pay for equal work. And it's an existing right in broadcast, in the communication to the public right, as it's set out in the 1988 Copyright Act. And basically, when it gets paid to PPL, the Phonographic Performance Limited, it is split 50-50 between the artists and the labels. And a small portion of it, of the artist side, goes to the non-featured artists, which is the backing performers, the backing artists. It's the only income that comes to that kind of musician, your violin player, your brass section. This is income that goes to them and provides a reliable income for our actual music community outside of our artists. Now, if you just apply equitable remuneration to some extent to on demand, suddenly, for the first time in history, money goes directly into the pockets on the first stream, irrespective of what awful contract terms an artist has, irrespective of all this historic stuff that's out there, which we can leave in place. The exclusive, all of that can stay. This produces an income from stream one for artists and an income for our entire music community. It's a very, very simple solution.
And so, Tom, would it be fair to say that what happens currently is that musicians receive that money, so-called ER, if something's played on the radio, but with streaming, what's complicated about it is that rather than you buying a record or downloading a track, as you used to do with your iPod, what you're doing when you stream music, sometimes you choose a track, and sometimes, in fact, quite a lot of the time, you're presented with a piece of music to listen to through the algorithm and so on. And therefore, it's kind of a hybrid of you downloading a track and you listening to the radio. And therefore, some money should be going to musicians in the same way as if that track was being played on the radio. And there's an existing legal right which we could latch onto if necessary and make some of that money get through to musicians. Is that the essence of your argument?
Absolutely. I mean, let's be clear, though. This isn't anything new. There are existing one-to-one non-linear broadcasting radio services in the world. I'm sure you'll have all heard of Pandora in the United States. This is a one-to-one algorithmic radio service, right? It just takes your preferences and plays music just for you, one-to-one. That service produces equitable remuneration. There is Last FM in this country, algorithmic radio, one-to-one streaming radio produces equitable remuneration. The algorithmic service playlisting within Spotify is called radio by Spotify. We'll all have seen it. If any of you use Spotify, it says radio on those playlists. And yet, for some reason, this activity, which is algorithmic playlists, algorithmic radio, is different to the other forms of algorithmic radio that are in the world. That the problem we have is that we're just left to a negotiation at the moment within the industry to decide what's what. And of course, the big, powerful major labels, these huge behemoth corporations, won't let equitable remuneration into streaming because it will eat into their margin. These people aren't bad. They're not bad people, but they will not do anything to affect their share value. So
I think you've made the point very clearly. My final question in this section, Tom, is just what is your response to the objections that the record industry have put in to this proposal, namely that I think you probably already answered this, that streaming isn't broadcasting, that B, it might in some way go against our treaty obligations, you know, as a United Kingdom, and C, that it might stifle industry growth and investment. Perhaps just B and C. I think we've talked about the first one, and I can see the other Tom has got his hand up as well on that. Shall we do that, Chair? Okay, so I'll go Tom Gray first. Can we, as briefly as possible, Tom, if you can just address that?
Yeah, of course. Sorry, yeah. And look, they have some valid points, but I'm saying we should apply an existing right to on demand, not to broadcast. So I'm not saying that streaming is broadcasting. So there's the first thing. I agree, streaming isn't broadcasting. It is one-to-one algorithmic playlisting, and equitable remuneration can be applied by it. You have the power legally to do it. This stuff about international treaties, look, let's be clear, that sounds like scaremongering to me. If it doesn't sound like scaremongering to you, let's invoke international treaties in the hope that you can't do a little something to rebalance things for British musicians.
Front of us in due course and explain that. Tom Frederikse, you briefly put your hand up there to just add something.
Regarding the application of equitable remuneration to streaming, clearly the on-demand nature of streaming is fundamentally different to that of broadcasting, but the music industry has a long tradition of crossbred music business models. Take, for example, mechanical rights, which were first invented in 1890 as a licensing model for self-playing pianos, but now still plays a big role in streaming. It has morphed through the ages. Or, for instance, the old model of vinyl and CD royalties, which is now very crudely bolted onto digital streams. So there is certainly a lot of precedent for pulling models and principles from one type to another. Also, on the point that you mentioned about the labels having their rights and their treaties, it's true that labels and publishers are afforded exclusive rights, allowing them to negotiate value for themselves in a free market, no doubt. But this does not stop governments from creating new restrictions on the copyright monopoly. A good example is the US, which on January 1st, in a month's time, will see the launch of a brand new national collective. The body is actually called a collective for the licensing of streaming rights. It's very analogous to the ER that we're now discussing. And let's remember that in the US, this launch of a new collective licensing scheme as a national monopoly will sit alongside the government regulated licensing schemes that have always set prices for all forms of streaming, including broadcasting, webcasting, and on-demand services. So I think the easy answer to what is ER is that it is collective licensing. It does create a restriction on the exclusive rights of the rights holder to negotiate for themselves. But as you've heard many times this morning, the artist label negotiation rarely takes place on a level playing field. So this goes some way towards helping that problem. And also, as we can see in the US and elsewhere, collective licensing for all forms of streaming and broadcasts is certainly possible.
Tom's Chair.
Mr. Young, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something regarding streaming. When historically we had two distinctive paths when we exploit recording the songs. One is a mechanical or a reproduction. So we look at a physical CD, a mechanical, we press it up, 1,000 are pressed, 1,000 royalties are paid. And there's public performance, which is radio play. That where the listener, the user, is passive. Simply the DJ chooses and it plays. So those are the two distinctive ways that the royalties are going to be administered. One is that of a physical record, CD, go into HMV, you buy it, you made that physical selection yourself. The second is your passive, you listen to it on the radio. Now, earlier, Tom explained that the division of the revenues, 55 to records, 15 to publishing, 30 to Spotify. The publishing industry, which is exploiting the songs, they make the distinction. They look at a stream and they say, part of the stream is a physical record, and part of the stream is radio play. They make that distinction. So a new administrative body was not invented when streaming arose. We're going to use the existing arrangements. So for publishing, we're going to use the Mechanical Copyright Protection Society for physical. And on radio play, we're going to use the Performing Rights Society for public performance. So you can see the split. When we look at the record side, which is where the fat is, where 55% goes, the whole amount is elected to be a physical record sale. It's a reproduction model, and you have to wonder, well, why is it? Because a physical record sale is HMV sells it to the public, record company sells it to HMV, and record company then pays artist. Under a streaming model, it's a subscription base. Spotify pays record label based on subscriptions. I'd pay $9.99 every month, regardless of how many streams. It's not the same. Streaming is fundamentally different from the physical model. I pay $9.99 if I stream 1,000 or I stream 100. And that's the distinction. And so what is being suggested is on the record is that that distinction be made. Should part be physical and should part be public performance? And that's where equitable remuneration would kick in if you make the same distinction as we do on publishing.
Thank you for that explanation.
So thanks very much for watching. In the next video, we will continue with this first session. Thanks again. Bye-bye.